All right, so we're going to get started. We're starting now. This is the first lecture, and you'll notice that as we go through this entire unit, there's going to be some things that sound familiar because of the first semester when we did move to global war with Japan. So this is perfect. It fits well with that first unit because a lot of what Japan was doing, but we're going to see through the Chinese perspective. So it's pretty, everything's working out exactly how I envisioned it. But let's start. All right. So just like with Castro and Nasir, we have to look at the conditions in China that led to Mao. Right. So we're looking at all the way back as far as to 1911. China was a very conservative nation. They had an emperor and, a strict hierarchy. And, the values in this society where basically you don't question the social order and you don't complain about it. So you kept a lot of people complicit for a very long time, up until the 19th century. And so in addition to that, China was also a feudal country with most of the population being peasants. Wealth and power again in the hands of the elites, the ruling class, the ruling clans, the lords, the aristocracy, all of that. So pause if you need to, but we're moving on. So with continuing with the conditions, there's a lot of resentment in China around this era, the late 1800s, early 1900s, because, foreign powers coming in and kind of doing the same thing they did with Japan, doing the same thing they did in Cuba, in Egypt, right? Coming in and basically dictating what's going to happen to that piece of land, to China. So it provoked resentment within within the Chinese population, against the dynasty, who was not really necessarily doing anything to stop these imperialistic foreign powers from coming in and calling the shots, right? There was a series of rebellions that happened. One of the most notable one was the Boxer Rebellion. And so basically the Boxers went out, murdered missionaries and Christians who were going into China and trying to forcibly convert people. And eventually, the foreign powers come in, they crush the Boxer Rebellion, the Chinese individuals part of that rebellion, when they end up sending about 50,000 soldiers to crush this rebellion by the Chinese population. When the rebellion was over, China was fined about $300 million. So just imagine us having a rebellion here in this country, right? Because we're pissed off because let's just say Canada is coming in, or not Canada. Let's think of a country that a lot of people, I don't know, Germany, right? Germany comes in and it's like, yeah, we're calling all the shots, and then we rebel against this power, Germany coming in and telling us what to do, and then we lose because Germany sends their soldiers, and then Germany was like, you know what? I'm gonna fine you. Like, I'm gonna make you pay me money because you want to start a revolution in your own country because you're upset that I'm bossing you around. That's literally how you have to think about it with this situation, because that's literally what happened. So after being pressured, the ruling emperor at the time, Guang, laid out a plan to reform and modernize China, kind of in a way to settle things down, the people. But that came to an end when Empress sorry, I can't say this, Dowager came in. It's the woman right there they see in the picture. She became the ruler of China, and which stopped any reform, any progress that China was going to make for its people to settle things down. Next one. So another cause of this growing unrest had to do with the high levels of poverty in China. And this is a common theme, okay? Keep this in mind when we're thinking about the conditions in both Egypt and Cuba, right? Poverty, high levels of poverty. 80% of the population was made up of peasants. That might not look the same as what you would see in Cuba or in Egypt, but just know that the peasant population was a big portion, and they were suffering because there was poverty. This posed difficulty for China because they only had about 10%, of the land that was good enough to actually use to farm things for agricultural. But even worse than that was natural disasters made it even smaller because it would just flood things and made things even harder for the peasants to survive. The landlords and the rich owed about 70% of the land. Those numbers are very comparable to those of Cuba and to those of Egypt. So that's another thing that you can compare and take note of if you wanted to. I would. Peasants were often plagued with debt because they had to pay 50 to 80% of their crop rent. as rent for using the land. So, the campesinos in Cuba having to give up so much of their income from the land that they're cultivating, to the landlords, right? Peasants were often, yeah, so we already read that one. Peasants also had to put up with the Chinese armies that would come in and destroy and also take their crops. Remember, in Egypt, the British would use all the resources early on, right? And that built up resentment. So there's another comparison right there. China's population also rose from 120 million from 1712 to 440 million by the 1900s. This is like a big population boom. But also China, just in general, it's like very big in terms of land. Famine was a frequent thing from that time, from the 1700s to the 1900s. Hunger increasing, more people being more poor, all of this stuff. Lack of industrialization. And next one. Because of this bitterness building up against the dynasty, building up against, the empire and the foreign powers, and the weak government that's not really doing anything to solve these issues, revolution ideas begin to spread and come out, right? And so people start forming groups. And so in 1911, peasants, townspeople, and students begin, their revolts and uprisings, and that makes sense, right? You at some point there's a tipping point where people get tired, and that's a common theme in Cuba and in Egypt as well, right? There's this man named Sun Yat-sen who was the leader of a group of young revolutionaries at the time, and he built his revolution on 3 principles, and I want you to really think about these principles. Principle number 1, nationalism, right? Having pride in your own country. Number 2, democracy. Having these peasants who have never had a say before finally have a say now. And number 3, improving the lives of the people through socialism. Okay, so that's basically what Sun was advocating for with his movement, and a lot of people followed along. Next one. So with the spread of revolution ideas, you have this revolution. It's not Mao's revolution. We're not there yet, okay? And the creation of a republic. So Southern Army's units are where you begin to see revolutionary plans spread. This can also be comparable to Egypt, right? Where the soldiers themselves are kind of like spreading this revolutionary ideas, right? And leading the movement. And you can say very similar things to Castro, but it was mostly peasants, right? Which, these ideas start to spread, which led to a buildup of bringing down the Qing dynasty, which is the last imperial dynasty in Egypt, and it falls in 1911. And so Sun Yat-sen is appointed president, but the revolution that he was trying to lead was not strong enough to really take a hold of China and control China. So in order to kind of just solidify their power, they recruit other peoples. And so they made a deal with this other guy named Shikai, right? And so this individual, Yuan Shikai, basically was like, yeah, I'll join you and I'll support you, but I want to be the president once the revolution is over, and I don't want Sun to be the president. And so basically Sun is like, well, I guess, the revolution is more important than like my ego, so I'm going to step aside and let this guy be president. And so they agree, and in February 1912, the revolution happens. It's over. It's short compared to what we've seen, and the Republic of China is, officially becomes a thing, right? Last one. Yuan's lack of commitment to the revolution, though, was very obvious, and it became exposed very, very soon during the 1913 parliamentary elections. So just think of parliament as like a Congress for them, okay? So we have Congress and we elect that, and they have a parliament and they elect their, and so these elections happened, and the Revolutionary Alliance, known as the Kuomintang GMD. GMD is going to play a big role for the rest of this chapter, by the way. So the GMD wins their elections, and Yuan reacts by basically banning them. And they're like, no, I don't accept this. And so again, that lack of commitment to revolution, where one of the ideals that Sun, the other guy, was promoting was democracy, right? How can you really say, your movement is about democracy now that Yuan's in charge? And he's like, nah, like, I don't accept these results. So in 1914, he shut down the parliament and proceeded to rule China as if he were emperor. So he's pretending at this point. And what made things worse is that, again, he proved to be unable to do some of the things that people were getting sick of from the last dynasty. Was you can't stand up to foreign aggression because you're letting people do whatever it is that they want. And so he wasn't able to stop foreign aggression either, and people were like, F you, you're fake too. In 1915, Yuan submitted to the most of the 21 demands. So remember in the semester one when we were looking at Japan, and Japan was like taking over regions in China. So that's happening at this moment in time. And so China's like, I'm giving you 21 demands that you have to meet or else, right? And so China had no choice but to submit. And so Yuan submits to most of those demands, and that pisses people off because it's so embarrassing, the fact that another country's coming in and basically making them bow down to them, right? These demands included the transfer of German provinces. Remember, Germany had a lot of colonies in China. And so after World War One, the idea of what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen to those provinces and all of that stuff. And eventually, Japan's demanding them, and eventually Japan gets them, right? This also included granting Japan the right to exploit mineral resources in southern Manchuria. We know about Manchuria. We saw what happened, what Japan did to Manchuria. And so that's going to play a big role in the next few lectures of like the instability that leads to the rise of Mao. Okay, that's all.